Hello, and welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
This is the podcast about murders and so much more. We will talk about anything strange, anything that goes bump in the night, and pretty much anything that amuses us.
And on that note, we need to mention that this podcast is not safe for work or delicate ears, so do be discerning who you listen to it with.
We also want to let you know that you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, so look for us there.
I am Shannon Lawrence. I am a writer, mom, wife, student, procrastinator, and you can find me at thewarriormuse.com.
My name is MB Partlow. I am a writer, an avid reader, an organizer extraordinaire, a mom to kids, cats, and a dog, and I call bullshit when I see it.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Shannon?
I'm good. First, we're going to have you introduce yourself so people know a little bit about who you are. Tell them about your book. Bookie Wookie that's coming out. And tell them about the one that's out.
Tell them everything they need to know.
Oh my God.
Well, when a dad loves a mom. Okay, so I'm David R. Slayton. I live in Denver, Colorado, originally from Guthrie, Oklahoma, home of many rural myths and urban myths, though really rural. I'm the author of the Adam Binder novels. Book 1, White Trash Warlock, was released in October 2020 from Blackstone Publishing in paper, ebook, and audio. It's the story of a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who has to go to Denver, Colorado in order to save his family from whom he's been estranged and also get the chance to say, I told you so. Book 2, Trailer Park Trickster, which goes back to Guthrie and deals with more urban rural myths there, as well as some Adam's darker extended family history, which I drew on from my dark extended family history, comes out in October 2021.
Yay. Yeah, the whole he gets to say I told you so is the most satisfying part of all. So good.
Yeah,
He's a
don't we
brat,
all
but I love him.
appreciate that?
Yeah.
He has a little of me in him. He has a lot of me in him.
As I will be going in about 2 weeks to Oregon, which is where the bulk of my family is, and already having panic attacks about that. So home, I totally get that. But most of the people I'll be very happy to see.
We just went by Guthrie. I've had to be bouncing back and forth. My mom's been in the hospital for a few months. And so we've been spending time in Guthrie as well as Oklahoma City. And for example, we got to go check out Dominion House, which is funny because I had forgotten it existed. So I put a sanitarium into the books called Liberty House, since I grew up on Liberty Lake, and then realized later there was an actual place called Dominion House that's now like a bed and breakfast wedding venue, but used to be a sanitarium. It's like, is my own book just messing with me, or does my memory have?
That's the kind of place that's the kind of venue you want to start your life with someone, an old asylum.
Yeah.
Well, and it was one of those places.
I mean, I do.
They found a lot. It was run by nuns at one point. It was a convent. They found a lot of infant bodies buried in the basement. And it's a very dark history. And it's considered one of the most haunted places in America.
I need to stay there.
That's what we're like. Next time we come, if we have time to stay, we've got to book a room and stay at Dominion House.
Yeah, that's creepy. I love it. That's just right on my alley. Well, hey, we can discuss what has everybody read. Anything?
Yes. Hold on. Let me flip back because I always have to write down the title and the author, or else I'll go, that book by that guy. But since we're talking, this is not set in Oklahoma, but I think it has some of the same flavor. I read a new, to me, Joe R. Lansdale novel. It's called More Better Deals, because when it starts out, the main character is working at a used car lot, and he is very much a shyster salesman, and it's very shady deals that they're making. The guy's name is Ed Edwards. And it's really amazing because it starts out, he has to go repo a car. Somebody bought a big red Cadillac convertible and didn't make payments. So he's got to go pick it up. Well, the woman who answers the door is this incredible femme fatale I mean, it's like the real life Jessica Rabbit. I mean, just voluptuous and over the top. So of course they fall madly in lust. But so it's this whole caper throughout. Her husband abuses her. She needs him to help her kill her husband to get rid of him so they can get all the insurance money. That's never been done before. And it's set back I'm trying to remember if I think it's set in the 70s. But the undercurrent through the whole book is that this guy, the main character, Ed, is mixed race. His mother is white and his father was black. His father left the family, so he hasn't seen him in years. He's got an older brother who's gone up north and is working in a car plant. But he and his sister, he has a younger sister, are both able to pass. And his mother wants them to pass to get ahead in life for the economic benefits, so they can get a better job, so they can get out of the slums, it's just twisty. Every aspect, because Joe Lansdale does that so beautifully. You're reading along and then there's a twist and you think, aha, now this is going to happen. No, something comes totally out of left field. It was a very good book.
You weren't going to forget his name.
That's true. I might, but
that's one author you weren't going to forget who wrote that.
No, but I could forget the title because
that's true.
That is me.
That's valid.
What have you read? Have you read anything, David, or do you have time to read?
Well, it's funny because I have a lot of deadlines writing the sequels, but I have been squeezing in time to read. So I kind of pivot between the darker, heavier stuff when I'm really in the mood for it, and then something kind of light and fluffy. So on the darker side, my friend Jamie Bean, her book Untouched, which is a doctor takes her students into the Amazon on basically a exploratory trip, and it starts devolving into this plant pathogen mystery. It's quite creepy and good. And I just started it, but I've been going slow because I need to savor it.
What's the title again?
Untouched by Jamie Bean, Jayme, and then Bean, just like it sounds.
Okay.
And then also on the dark side of my favorite stuff lately is I've read C.S. Poe and Gregory Ash, who are two of my favorite indie authors. C.S. Poe writes this awesome steampunk series that starts with The Engineer, and I love her stuff. And then Gregory Ash writes a lot of different genres, but I've been reading a lot of his more hard-boiled cop thriller stuff. They recently collaborated on a series that starts with A Friend in the Dark. And it does such a great job. I'm getting chills talking about it because Gregory brings that very edgy tone, and C.S. Poe, she does such a gorgeous job with characterization, and they write dueling points of view, and it was very obvious to me right away who was writing who. But it's set in New York, and it's one of those books that does such an amazing job of making the city feel like a true character.
I love it. Yeah.
The second one just came out and I devoured it. So those are kind of like my late at night, trying to read through but savoring books because they're a little too dark when life gets heavy. And then on the complete flip side, Simon James Green, who writes fantastic young adult comedic gay fiction. His stuff is so good, but it just gives you all the teen awkward that I literally can only read like half a chapter and I have to put it down because I'm cringing so much. I just started his newest book, The One That I Want, off after the Grease song title, and I'm just loving it. It's just cracking me up, but at the same time, it's giving me like all those triggers back to awkward high school David.
Oh no.
Yeah, I just got a package from my sister and it had some high school photos of me, like prom photos. And I posted that because I'm like, I have no shame. I posted them on Facebook. And it's, I had the hair, this long straight hair down to my butt and the big glasses. And of course, what every girl had then, when I had my hair done for prom, it had the baby's breath stuck in it.
Oh,
because that was just the height of fancy and sophisticated.
Yeah.
In rural upstate New York.
Upstate New York. Hey, I've been looking at houses on that for the Love of Old Houses, and there have been some good upstate New York properties.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about disappearing into the woods right now.
This amazing one in Ashton, Kansas. I can't pronounce it. It's on the river, and it's this gorgeous Victorian. It's like $380,000 and just massive. I'm like, what are we doing in Denver?
Right? Well,
And then
I've been,
again, Kansas. So,
yeah, no, can't, no.
There are some good points to Kansas, but
no.
there's the small points. It's not the big picture.
there's a readily available supply of meth. I mean, there's that.
There really is.
Yeah,
Even
know,
in a small town.
And if I ever want to go for a drive and see as many crosses as possible and messages along the road, that's where I go. My favorite is Jesus and the wheat, and it always will be.
But if you want fireworks and Jesus and sex toys all in one stop, you got to go to Missouri.
That's a valid point. Yeah, I've been passing through Kansas a lot lately, and on my drives back and forth to Oklahoma, going, "Yep, no need for Kansas right now."
There's places I want to go because I'm a Wild West buff, right? That I would love to go, but that's really about it. And having driven across Kansas the long way multiple times, it's second only to driving the long way across Wyoming for me to get to Oregon. So
well,
I'm like,
and you know how it is with states, you kid your neighbors. So being from Oklahoma, we kid Kansas. But to be honest, I really want to go to Kansas City. They have the World War I museum there, the memorial, which is phenomenal. That was formed right after the war. So it itself is pretty historic. The structure, not just what it contains. And also in Lawrence, Kansas is the Raven Bookstore, which is a phenomenal bookstore that's doing a whole lot for indie bookstores. So, and I have a few friends there too. So I tease Kansas, but
I do have friends there too. Wonderful people. They also, if you go to Kansas City, A, barbecue, B, they have a little tram that runs you, along the downtown, which is pretty cool. And we were told, so we went there for WorldCon, and somebody was like, there's a speakeasy here. And you actually have to know, like, there was a phrase or something to get in. And this is well before we had a little speakeasy here in Colorado Springs, that the front of it is like, it looks like a barbershop, or it is a barbershop or something. I don't remember. I haven't been there yet because I don't really drink. So, I want to go there for the novelty and then be like, okay, bye. Do you have food here? No. Okay. But yeah, there's supposed to be this really cool speakeasy with a great steakhouse. And yeah,
I remember researching that, but I can't remember what it was called.
Oh, I don't know. Because I asked somebody like, hey, where would you recommend we go eat? And then like 20 people crowded around me to tell me where you should go eat in Kansas City, but the speakeasy stuck with it. We just went out for barbecue. So, and then I think you and I just hurriedly went and got stuff. There was like a grocery store that had a great little restaurant in it.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. I don't remember what that was called either, but yeah. So Kansas City is neat.
I also know where there's a great Thai restaurant in rural Kansas because Thing One lives in Kansas.
Yeah.
So
every place has hidden history or hidden gems. That's funny how much about Oklahoma I've learned since leaving and writing books about it and researching is, I knew all these things kind of apocryphal or family myth, but then about my grandmother being friends with Pretty Boy Floyd and all these things.
Yay.
I didn't understand all the gangster history of Oklahoma until I sat down and started talking to family members and doing research and realizing there's actually, and especially in the urban myth, rural myth area, there's so much creepy stuff, and which is great because I've been incorporating it all into the books.
Yeah. So basically the 20s gangsters are second only to the Wild West for me. And I had, because a portion of my family is from Indian territory, we had all these interactions with Wild West folks, like along the line, with somebody, and I'm not even going to try and say correctly which relatives, because it'll probably be wrong, but I think it was my great that they used to hide because Belle Starr and her gang would come riding through because they lived near Robbers Cove. And somebody knew the James family. I don't know if they actually met Jesse and Frank, but stuff like that. And of course I ate all that up when my grandpa would tell me about it. So, and then he had the most wonderful, slow Oklahoma drawl. So like he could tell a story like nobody. you'd have to wait for it for them to get there.
God.
But I
My
love
mom
that.
will leave me these voicemails, and back when there were answering machines, my roommates, I'd come home and find them crowded around the answering machine, playing it, rewinding and playing it. Like, David Ray, the cows came home last night. Don't know where they went, but they done gone come home. You know, it's really funny because I don't have that accent unless I get tired, drunk, or pissed off. And you generally know when you've said the wrong thing, because I'll start to say ah instead of I.
Uh-huh.
Say get instead of
That's
get.
the thing that goes first is those eyes
Oh,
in a while. And
I will kill you. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So my husband's from Texas originally. He has zero accent. And then his brother comes and visits. Now, in his defense, he was adopted out when he was 4. They kept his big brother. They adopted him out. So that's complicated. But we were in contact with his birth mom and everything. And he always was. But his brother has the big, deep, rural Texas drawl, and Jeff has nothing, not even when he gets upset. Like my mom would go to Oklahoma when she got upset, and I don't even remember how long she lived there, and the people who adopted him were from Texas, so he just never got an accent. And I always found that fascinating because I'm that person that if I'm around a person with an accent, I will pick it up and then try and pretend I'm not picking it up and not do it. And so I spend the whole time trying not to make them think I'm mocking them, but I pick up an accent just in a snap.
It was so hard when we met R.L. Stein and his wife. Because I'm like, oh my God. They were so nice. But yeah, that was just, the accent was so hard not to.
There's nothing in Oregon. There's no.
Well, Oregon's very broadcast English. It's very flat, which is what they say. We're all starting to speak broadcast English from TV, and when people think English, they think what they hear on television. And that's why they had so many telemarketing centers in Colorado, because Colorado doesn't have an accent. It's very broadcast English. But it is funny how rural accents are fading. And it's interesting, though, going home back to the woods, it takes me 5 minutes and I'm already right back there with the drawl and the buzzsaw.
We'll see. Yeah, I love accents, dialects, all that. I used to know somebody and she would correct everybody when you said accent, and she'd say, no, they're dialects. It's not accents. And I'm like, okay, dialect means something different to me. And I'm just going to go with what 99% of the public considers an accent. And I'm not going to be the one correcting people and saying dialect, because I still don't understand what you're saying about what it's supposed to be. But yeah, I can pick out, there's places I have trouble with, like New Zealand and South Africa can be very similar, which is odd. And it'll take me a little bit often to figure out which is which, unless it's extreme, And then like Belgian and French can really throw me for a loop sometimes, where I'm sitting, I have to listen for a little bit and be like, are you from Belgium? But I'm always that person that's asking people because I like to learn about it. I feel like I could have worked in that field, just doing that because I find it fascinating.
I agree. And just like within Germany, my friend, I was visiting some friends in Germany and they were living in Tübingen, and that being South German, it has a Swabian influence, which is very different than Hochdeutsch, which is a High German, and so they were talking about, okay, the phrases we're teaching you and the way we're teaching you to speak, and I've retained none of it, of course, is they're going to think of you like a hick. I'm like, okay, well, I'm used to that in my life, so that's not a surprise. But she's like, if you go up to Berlin and say it the way we're teaching you, they're going to look down on you because you're not speaking proper German. You're speaking with a Southern accent. I'm like, again, this is just my story. I'm used to that. So, but it's interesting how even, we think German one, again, put that in a book, actually, that there are many different types of German. And outside of Germany, we think of it as one unified language, and it's not. There are dialects and there are variations.
Well, and okay, so you go to a big place like Texas, there's a billion different variations depending on where you are from in Texas. And God, how many variations on Spanish language are there? I mean, Argentina is a completely different, there's even different aspects of the language spattered in there, from other parts of South America, for example. So yeah, it just fascinates me how we could spread out from the same place in the beginning and somehow have all these different languages and all these different ways of using those languages. And I mean, like English itself, right? That's crazy. That's all over the place. So yeah, I love it. Obviously, babble, babble.
Well, and when words get weird meanings or have different meanings to different people, in my day job, I do a lot of corporate training. And many years ago, we were teaching a course on contracts and procurement. And the Australians on the call started laughing at some of the Asia Pacific people, because then where they were from, procurement meant to procure a prostitute.
Oh,
They're like, that's not how we think of obtaining office supplies, giggle, giggle. I was like, oh my. So it's interesting how words can have different, meanings and variations.
yeah. I think my favorite was I had a friend whose mom was from England. And she was telling us when she first came to America, she was staying at a hotel and she rang up the front desk and she was like, I need you to knock me up at 7 a.m. And they were like, excuse me. But that's what they would say. Because I mean, literally where she was from, they'd come knock on your door at 7. So it was called knock me up. And even when it went to phone, they just still used knock me up. So yeah. And of course, they're like,
how much do you charge for that service?
Right? Like, ma'am, I don't want you to have my baby. I don't. what's happening here?
Ma'am, we're not equipped for that.
No.
It might have also just been the very casual delivery. I need you to knock me up at 7 a.m. Just
right. Right.
Very down to business. Just
because they're looking at her like, oh, call the police. All right. So, shall we?
I think you're going to start this time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a warning to listeners, the stories will lighten up after me. This one will involve rape and murder. It's going to have some murder in it. So trigger warning. However, I'm not going to go into like crazy detail or intense detail. It is crimes against children. So just a warning if anybody wants to fast forward through my part or just needs that. Okay, so I'm going to do the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Sources only in your state: girlscoutmurders.com, forensictales.com, New York Times, Strange Outdoors, Tulsa World, and the Oklahoman. All right. June 4th, 1966, a 22-year-old Cherokee man from Locust Grove, Oklahoma, named Gene Leroy Hart, which gave me kind of a heart attack at first. And then I was like, wait, because my grandma's name was Hart, but she was of the white part of my family, not the Cherokee. And then I was like, oh yeah, no, she married a super white guy. I have no relation. It's okay. Gene Leroy Hart drove up to an area of Tulsa known as the Corner of Dreams and kidnapped 2 women, one 18, one 19, both pregnant, though not visibly. They were both 3 months or less, it said. From in front of the Fond du Lac Club, he forced them into his trunk and drove around for a while before pulling one out of the trunk and raping her. He then drove for a bit longer before taking them both out of the trunk, walking them deeper into the woods, is a very rural area, and raping both of them, then taping their hands, mouths, and one article I said he taped over their mouths and noses, and he intended to leave them to die, but I only saw that in one article, and taped their ankles together also and left them in the woods in Mays County, where Locust Grove is located. So it appears he left them to die. He said something about he'd come back, but he wasn't coming back. But one of the women, she worked her bonds free and removed the other women's, and they were able to get to the road for help. And here was the thing. None of the articles mentioned their names. So I don't know if that was a request of the victims. I don't know if that was more responsible reporting at the time.
I doubt that.
Right. But it surprises me. So I was like, okay, unless it was just who cares about the victims or their names? Here's the guy that we need to be interested in, so I didn't find their names. I'm not omitting them to leave out the victims. They were able to identify the make and model of the car, plus the first 4 numbers of his license plate. So 2 troopers end up spotting the car while it's driving around based on that description, and they arrested him within hours of the crimes. The women were able to identify him from photos, and he was charged with kidnapping, burglary, because he did take money from their purses, and rape. He admitted to everything, though he said he never used a gun, because one of the women said, well, he used a gun to get us into the trunk. And he said, I did everything that they are saying exactly as they are saying it. I did not use a gun. I've never owned a gun. So, and they didn't find a gun, and there was no proof he ever had a gun. No gun. He was convicted October 14th, 1966, and given a sentence of 10 years per 3 convictions to be done concurrently. He was paroled after 28 months, but then arrested again after a series of burglaries in 1969. This time he pleaded not guilty, but was convicted and sentenced to 305 years in prison. I just want to note right here for what 3 rapes, 2 burglaries, 2 cases of kidnapping. He got 10 years per the 3 convictions for the rapes. 10 years. For 4 burglaries, he got 305 years in prison. How backwards is that?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
What part of town did the people he robbed live in? I'm guessing the nicer side.
I'm guessing the white side.
Yeah.
So anyway, but in 1973, he and 2 other prisoners escaped by using a hacksaw on their barred windows. The other 2 prisoners were caught quickly, but they never found Hart. So we're going to fast forward. Camp Scott was a 410-acre area used by the Girl Scouts since 1928 in Mays County, Oklahoma. It was a short distance from Locust Grove, and it was heavily wooded, consisted of canvas tents set up on wooden platforms for the actual camp area. They had a pool and they had a big gathering hall. It had grown over the years. Each of the tents was built to hold 4 cots, and each one was named after a Native American tribe. In late April 1977, a counselor in training returned to her tent to find someone had been in it. They'd gone through her things and eaten her donuts. She had a box of donuts, and the box is still there. No, donuts are gone, and there's a note in the donut box, and it says, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1." The counselor took it to the director, who thought it must be a prank. They threw away the note. They never pursued it. They didn't call the police or anything like that. So then we go forward a couple months, June 12th, 1977. I was like, in 1977 in June, I was tormenting my mother from the inside in the middle of summer. Yeah, 4.
I'm not playing this game.
You're not. I was born in November of that year. All right, June 12th, 1977. 140 girls headed out from the Tulsa Girl Scout headquarters, ready for stay-away camp. 3 girls were put in tent 8 in Camp Kiowa. So they'd have these little sections. And Camp Kiowa had 8 tents because that was the last tent in the row. Their names were Doris Denise Milner, who will go by Denise from here on out because that's what she preferred. She was 10 years old. Lori Lee Farmer, 8 years old. And Michelle Heather Goose, 9 years old. Their tent was the farthest from tent number 1. And the tent number 1 was where the 3 counselors stayed for Camp Kiowa. The tent was also not in their line of sight because there was a shower block between them. So not a great arrangement in the woods.
No.
You'd think they would have put the counselors, I don't know, center maybe. Anyway, in total in Camp Kiowa, there were 27 girls under the charge of those 3 counselors. The first night was stormy, so festivities ended early. There was a thunderstorm. All the girls went to their tents and they had their flashlights, each one, and whatever else they brought from home. In tent 8, the girls decided to write letters to their parents. And I actually will read one of those later, but there was a reporter, a journalist, and I think it was for Tulsa World paper, but it might have been a different one, so don't quote me on that. And he made it a point throughout the reporting on this event to always mention these little girls' names in every single article and make sure that their names were front and center within the first 2 paragraphs of his stories. He said he took a lot of flack for that, but he was not going to let people forget these little girls. And one of the things that was done in the papers is they did a little snippet for each little girl, remembering this child, and they have their last letters they wrote.
Oh, God.
I know. I did not enjoy researching this story even a little bit for various reasons. A bit before 10 p.m., one of the counselors from Camp Comanche saw a light somewhere out in the woods. She went to check it out, but when she saw the light was heading toward Camp Kiowa, she figured it was just one of the counselors from that camp, and she went back to her tent. Also at 10 p.m., a tent check was done in Camp Kiowa, and everything was fine. So it could have been the counselor if they were doing that around the same time. At around midnight, a counselor escorted some girls to the latrine, which was near tent 8. At 1:30 a.m., a counselor had to talk to the girls in tent 6 because they were being too noisy. She heard strange guttural sounds coming from the woods, but couldn't figure out what they were. As they didn't sound like any human or animal sounds she'd heard before, she grabbed a flashlight and walked around trying to figure out where the noises were coming from, but they stopped abruptly. So they were done. So she goes back to her tent and she goes to sleep. But she reported that they woke her up a few more times. She heard the sounds, but they'd end after a moment. At some point between 1 and 3 a.m., a girl in another tent heard a single scream. Around 3 a.m., a girl cried out for her mom, which could have been, it was the first night at camp.
Girl Scout camp, that happens.
Yeah. At an unknown time, the girls in tent 7 were alarmed when a man pulled back their tent flap and directed a flashlight in at them, but he replaced the flap and he moved away. When the counselor who'd heard the weird noises woke up early the next morning, she had time before they needed to start waking up campers, so she went to grab her shower so she could get ready for the day. And on her way to the building, she saw a weird bundle under a tree, and she got closer to it. She figured she had no idea what it was. And next to this bundle, which turned out to be a sleeping bag, was the body of a little girl. The body was naked from the waist down and lying on its back. The counselor's name was Carla Wilhite, and she ran back to tent 1 to wake up the other counselors. And while they went to check the tents, finding tent 8 not only empty, but blood spattered on the canvas and on the wooden floor, Carla ran on to the director and the camp nurse to bring them back. And the nurse checked the body. The little girl was dead. And that little girl was Denise. She was the first one they found. Her hands were tied behind her back, and she'd suffered head injuries and had a rope around her throat. The other 2 girls were found inside their sleeping bags, just left in the woods. They'd been zipped up in their bags and carried out and dumped in the woods. So the director calls in the highway patrol, and the local sheriff comes. And he actually called in the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation from the beginning because he was like, this is beyond our capabilities in this little town. Nothing like this had ever happened, obviously. So once the investigation started, it was found that the killer had unhooked the tent from behind so they had flaps on both sides. So it was on the woods side. Lori and Michelle had been bludgeoned inside the tent and sexually assaulted. Whoever had committed the crimes had used sheets from the beds to try to clean up the blood, not successfully. And they had missed one boot print, and that boot print was a size 9.5 men's. Unfortunately, the press would leak this. And so investigators were like, well, now they're going to throw away their shoes. Thanks. Cool. So whoever leaked that. There were also some vague footprints found in the dirt that led from the tent to where Denise's body had been found. Denise had been bound and gagged, then walked over to a different area where she was sexually assaulted, bludgeoned, and finally strangled to death. The gag in her mouth had been hand sewn, so they came with this gag. A hair was found in a piece of duct tape, and a fingerprint was on the lens of a red flashlight found lying in the woods. There were thought to be 2 weapons used for the bludgeoning, one of them at least a crowbar, and there were 2 different types of knots in the bindings. Tape and rope were left behind, and it had been stolen. They were able to track it because it had been stolen from a nearby farm owned by a man named Jack Schroff. And they did question him and look into him, but he had an alibi. He had passed the lie detector test, and he volunteered to take that test. And I believe he had reported somebody had broken in and stolen some things, but they weren't important things. He didn't get burgled. They stole tape and other items, the rope. Various pairs of eyeglasses had been stolen from different tents that night and left around the camp. During the search, police found a cave 3 miles away, which held signs of someone living there. In addition to standard items, they discovered women's underwear, a photo of 2 women, eyeglasses that had been stolen from the camp, and a newspaper that matched a bit of newspaper stuffed inside the red flashlight to help keep the battery connection because it was loose in there. Police made the photo public that they had found with the 2 women, and somebody a wedding photographer actually contacted them and said, I recognized that from one of the weddings I did years ago. And it turned out that Hart had been responsible for developing those photos while in prison. It was one of the jobs he did. So
who thought that was a good idea?
I don't know. And I'm like, well, we'll circle back around. So okay, that's a long memory for the photographer to be like, I remember that. It's from a wedding I did. He'd been missing for over a decade. Wait, no. 9 years, 8 years. Anyway, Agent Pratt, a Cherokee, recognized the formation of 4 fires and cigarette butts as being part of a smoke ritual. There was cedar. There were some filters had been removed from the cigarettes. There was So anyway, he said, okay, this is a Cherokee that's out here. I recognize this. And the cigarette butts tested with an O blood type, which Hart had. And a boot print was found that matched the bloody print in tent 8. However, Hart had size 11 feet. Just for the record, putting that out there. They then found a second cave. Writing on the wall said 77-6-17. So that's June 17th, 77. And that's how they do dates, both military and prison. That's how they use the military dating in prison. The killer was here. Bye-bye, fools. And I do have a picture of that, which I'll post on Instagram. With the massive size of the camp, police hired a security firm to try to keep intruders out during the investigation. However, even with security there, someone repeatedly re-entered the camp. At one point, a bag was left containing a pair of little pink socks and a pair of shoes with Denise Milner written inside those shoes. Hart's mother's house had been between the first cave and the camp, so he was local to the area. In addition to the array of evidence found, the noises the counselor had reported resembled noises reported by the pregnant women raped by him previously, and they'd mentioned that he had tried on the eyeglasses of one of the women when putting them in the trunk to see if their prescription worked for him. So it appeared he needed glasses but couldn't afford them or whatever. Their underwear had not been found after the crime, though he said he'd thrown them over a bridge. That underwear was never found to be connected with what was found in the cave. During the manhunt for Hart, considered the biggest in Oklahoma history, he became a creepy legend. So part of that was, so we're in the 70s, and a lot of the stuff I was reading was, ooh, there's a creepy Indian loose. He's consulting with medicine men. He's a ghost in the wood. It was, the mystical Indian, whatever the hell it is. But everybody was claiming to see him. There were articles written, and one of the headlines was, only 10 feet away, farmer thinks he saw Hart. So, journalism. It was said that he had gone to 2 Cherokee medicine men, and that did turn out to be true. They were friends of his. When 2 search dogs died, it was attributed to him, like in a mystical sense, like the medicine men had, whatever.
Oh, good Lord.
So there was a mix. Some of that was ridiculous to read. But anyway, people started donating money from around the country to put out a reward for his capture. Police captured Hart April 6, 1978 on a friend's property, thanks to an informant. When they found him, he was wearing a pair of women's eyeglasses. They charged him with capital murder. There was semen in the tent as well as hair samples, but at that time they had no way to test semen for DNA or anything like that. The hair sample was found to be inconclusive. They couldn't say this is his. They couldn't say it wasn't. The fingerprint on the flashlight did not match Hart's fingerprints. I put these out here for a reason. A former jailer testified for the defense that some of the evidence supposedly turned up in the cave had been in the state's possession for 3 years before the murders. A Girl Scout testified that she'd seen a man lurking around the camp, and when shown photos of a Kansas man in jail for rape, she identified William Stevens as the man she'd seen. He had not been in jail at the time. Other witnesses for the defense felt Hart had been scapegoated due to his being a full-blooded Cherokee, suspected to being hidden in the area after his prison escape. It was known that Sheriff Weaver didn't like Indians. Many also said he had a personal vendetta against Hart because Hart had escaped his prison and was the only man who had done so without being caught. The first thing Hart said when he met his lawyer was, "I want you to know one thing, I didn't kill those Girl Scouts." The Cherokee Nation Tribal Council donated money for Hart's defense, making a statement to be very clear that they were not taking a position on whether Hart was guilty or innocent, but wanted to be sure that one of their citizens did receive a fair trial. Because in the 70s, what were the chances that a full-blooded Cherokee man was going to get a fair trial? March 20th, 1979, the jury found Hart not guilty. He burst into tears when they read the verdict. He was returned to prison to serve the remainder of his 305 years. I think he'd served 3, so we have 302 left, something like that, for his previous crimes. Many in the area hadn't believed he was guilty of the crime, and they'd raised money for his defense. The community was actually quite torn over his acquittal, as he'd been well known in the area as a football hero before he committed his crimes. He was very intelligent. He was very well spoken. It was a mess. And in addition, it was doubly a mess within the Cherokee community. 2 of the OSBI officers, the Federal Bureau, the Oklahoma Bureau officers were from the same tribe. Many of the cops probably were as well. Some tribal members were suspected of having helped Hart hide after his breaking out from prison all those years. Obviously, they had to have been, including the 2 medicine men that had made it into the news, and they were charged for helping him hide. June 5th, 1979, Hart collapsed while working out and was pronounced dead. He was 35 years old. It was a massive heart attack. Last I read, they were doing an autopsy because he was very healthy and athletic and he had no known heart issues. But I imagine they found he had one. You don't find it till you find it, right?
Yeah.
In 1989, the semen was tested for DNA. DNA testing showed that 3 of 5 prongs matched Hart's DNA. It was said that statistically 1 in 7,700 Native Americans would obtain these results from their DNA. It didn't say how many like non-Native American, I don't know. When they retested the semen in 2008, it was inconclusive. The samples had degraded too much. 2 of the families sued the Girl Scouts for negligence, but lost the case. The third family, the Guses, the family was outspoken about choices the Girl Scout organization made, but they chose not to be part of the lawsuit. Michelle Guse's father stated that when the organization contacted him, they told him only that his daughter had died. He found out about the brutality of her death from the TV news when he turned it on. She was only one of the 3 girls who had been to the camp before. Her dad went on to found the Oklahoma Crime Victims Compensation Board and to help the state legislature pass the Oklahoma Victims Bill of Rights. Lori Lee Farmer's mom has had to live with the fact that her daughter was having trouble deciding between 2 camps to go to that summer, the other being a YMCA camp. And because the little girl would not make up her mind, the mom made the choice for her. So that has haunted her ever since. Her father, Dr. Farmer, said the camp called their insurance company first, then their attorney, then called the parents to notify them something had happened to their children, and that they stated only that the 3 girls had been found deceased outside their tent, not that they'd been murdered. They said there had been an accident when they called. Like, I don't know what they thought they were going to achieve by doing that. It was obviously going to come out. But anyway, so the Tulsa paper that did the tribute and shared their final letters. This one was from Lori. Dear Mom and Dad and Misty and Joe and Chad and Kathy. She was oldest of 5 kids. We're just getting ready to go to bed. It's 7:45. We're at the beginning of a storm and having a lot of fun. I've met 2 new friends, Michelle Guse and Denise Milner. I'm sharing a tent with them. It started raining on the way back from dinner. We're sleeping on cots. I couldn't wait to write. We're all writing letters now because there's hardly anything else to do. With love, Lori. Lori was the youngest girl at the camp that summer. But again, she was the oldest of 5 children. She was very mature for her age. And considering she was 8, those children were just stacked one on top of the other. Her mother ended up forming the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children. So 2 of the parents did a lot after this. They got a lot of great things put into place because of these crimes. And she's been an outspoken advocate of crime victims since her daughter's death. Denise Milner had been excited about going, but became anxious as the date neared. Her mom talked her into going, saying it would teach her independence, but that if she truly didn't like it once she was there, she could call them and they would come pick her up. Her last letter said she wanted to come home, that one she was writing in the tent. She probably would have called the next day if they would have let her. Her mom, as of a 2002 article, had never visited her gravesite. Denise had been accepted to a Tulsa magnet school for gifted children. She was the only Black Girl Scout there that year. And her parents had just gotten a divorce that summer before she went off to camp. So she'd been helping her mom a lot around the house and with her little sister. No one else was pursued for the crime. Law enforcement believes Hart committed the crimes. It's questioned whether there was more than one person due to it being shown that the weapons were held in both left and right hands during the attack, and there were different knots used, plus the question of how one man kept 3 girls quiet throughout the attack, why the shoe print and fingerprints did not match, all of those details. However, law enforcement has not pursued there being 2 killers, and the questions seem to be raised mostly by internet sleuths. Law enforcement still considers the case closed. They never reopened it after the not guilty verdict. Camp Scott never reopened after that day. When they found the bodies, they loaded all the other kids onto buses and sent them home, notified the children or the children's parents. The children had no idea what was going on. So there's all these pictures because, of course, journalists were swamping everything at this point. And so the journalists knew these kids were coming back home. So all these little girls are loaded onto these buses, told you don't get to camp anymore. You're going home. Something happened. And they get off the bus and there's journalists taking their pictures and trying to talk to their parents. Like, can you just the unimaginable how crazy all of that would have been and how confusing. Yeah. So that was why I made the point of the only thing that tied Hart to the crime definitively from that cave was the newspaper that matched the newspaper that was in the flashlight. Fingerprints didn't match. His shoe size didn't match. They couldn't conclusively say the hair match, but the DNA really throws a wrench into that too. So anyway, it'll never be known if he committed the crime or if there's some other man out there that got away with it, or if he had a partner in crime who got away with it. Nobody will ever know. So it's considered one of the biggest crimes in Oklahoma. And unfortunately, one that is never going to have any real answers. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad I'm hearing this after my children are out of Girl Scout camp age.
Yeah, I thought about that.
I'm glad I'm hearing it in the middle of the day, so there's still many hours between now and dark. But,
yeah, admittedly, it was like I was researching this one until like 5 a.m. And at one point I got up at like 4 a.m. deep in it and reading all the details and all the articles. There are a lot of articles out there about it. And there are websites, especially, let's see, I think it's girlscoutmurders.com has a phenomenal amount of articles and information about the area where the first two women were taken and pictures of the Girl Scout camp then and now and stuff like that. It was a really good resource. But yeah, I got up and closed my back door. Like, why do I just have my back door open right now? Maybe I don't want to. So yeah, sad.
I can't even imagine being those parents.
It's chilling. And it's the unanswered part, I think, that is so hard, even after all this time, right? It's been, 40 years and we still don't know, over 40 years, and we still don't know anything. I've been researching. My cousin was murdered in 1974 in Oklahoma City, and there's nothing. We have nothing. I was able to find his grave, but he was murdered. He was gay and he was murdered. So there was nothing put in the paper. As far as I can tell, no case or investigation of any kind.
Does it seem to have been a hate crime, or?
It seems it was either a hate crime or like a trick gone bad. Okay. So he was living with his father and he'd had someone over. His father came home and found him naked in bed. The light was out and said, "Oh, he must be cold." So he threw a blanket over him. Oh. And several hours have gone by and James hadn't gotten up. And so his father said, "Oh, he's getting close to dinner. He must be hungry." So he went in and turned the light on. And then he saw that he had been, this may be apocryphal from the family, that he had a screwdriver in the side of his head, that he'd been stabbed brutally. But he was found naked in that condition. And I've been digging into it the last few months because I borrowed some of it and wanted to give him and my other two gay cousins who were erased from my family in some acknowledgement in Trailer Park Trickster, and use some parts of their stories and make sure that they know they're not forgotten wherever they are. And that's as much information on James as I have been able to find. And as a historian by degree, I'm pretty good at research. So next time I'm in Oklahoma City, I'll see if I can get into more records and see what I can find. But it's been a really cold trail.
Man, yeah. They just avoided.
They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. Like my cousin Mervyn, who died of AIDS in 1990, I think 92, might have been 94. They wouldn't talk about it. So, but coincidentally, James's grave is in the same cemetery. He's on my mother's side, is in the same cemetery as my father's family. Didn't know that. And Oklahoma City is a geographically vast place with lots of cemeteries. So it is nice that now when I go visit my father's grave, I can visit James. But yeah, this is all family history that my mother is just now starting to give up as she turns 70.
Yeah, that's it. We do not talk about this. Has she been a little freer talking about more things, or?
I think she realized the time is running out, that if she doesn't pass the information on, that it will fade. And no one will know. And her mother wouldn't talk about it. So she feels the need to kind of correct her mother's mistakes about talking about dark things or the bad things that happen, like illness and these murders in the family, or this murder in the family, and then the other deaths. What's funny, though, is the way my mother delivers the information. Is she will say it as calmly as if she's offering you aspirin. So you have this gay cousin that was murdered. Like, what? Excuse me.
Back up.
Yeah, just very calmly doles out these gory details on a drive. I'm like, okay, didn't know that. Glad you told me, but like no emotion.
My mom used to do stuff like that. So we'd be talking about something and she would just drop these details that I could remember the situation happening when I was a kid. But of course, when you're young, you don't know any of the details. We were talking about someone who we knew who had adopted a child. And I said something about what year was it they adopted the child's name? And my mother looks at me, she goes, they didn't adopt that baby. They bought that baby. And my jaw just dropped. And I was like, what? She goes, you knew that. And I was like, back up.
I didn't.
Barbara, I did not know that. I was like, I don't know if for a minute she thought I was my sister or, but I was like, no. What?
I'd say I'm basically the person in the family who knows, well, all the combined things from everybody, and so I could see that happening, like talking to one of my siblings, like, about this. And they'd probably be like, no, I bet Shannon knows about it. But,
or then there's, going to a funeral and discovering new family members you didn't know you had.
Yeah. I have two half brothers I've never met my father thought he was being so secretive because he would get drunk and tell me, I have these two sons that I had with other women. And then he'd tell my brother, I have these. It was like, you realize that when you get drunk, you talk, right? And that we then talk. You think you're telling us some secret, but we've all shared the information.
It's like my husband, it turns out he probably has a half brother somewhere, which the details aren't mine to talk about, but it's that's down in Texas, rural Texas. And we do know some more of the background of that. But in my family, it was, you don't talk about being native, which is why I have zero information for my heritage. And you can see in the census reports when they stopped putting Indian on them and started putting white. So it wasn't good to be native, and the more white passing you were, the better. And so they handed down nothing. It was something to be ashamed of. So we don't even know if my grandpa's enrolled. I feel he is, because he received a letter back when they were doing, we're going to make up for the terrible things we did to you by giving you this plot of farmland in Oklahoma. And he got that letter. I don't understand how he would have gotten that letter if he was not enrolled. I know his dad was, because he was on the Dawes rolls. I know his mom was. So I have no idea. So which is why I'm not. It's not as easy. Some people think it's just as simple as, here's my grandpa.
Yeah.
Enroll me. And it's not, because I've had people, well, if you're not enrolled, you're not really native. Okay. Well, that's a federal government thing. That's a white government thing. That has nothing to do with the actual Cherokee Nation. Thank you. Have a lovely day. But it's a lot of work. What you have to do is trace your relative to the Dawes rolls, which closed in something like 1914. My great grandpa is only enrolled because he was 4 years old when it happened. And then you have to get the birth certificates of everybody from I would need to get his birth and death certificate, my grandpa's, my mom's birth certificate, and then mine, all mine to prove it. And guess what? There were fires. And then my great grandma was even harder. I will never be able to be fully enrolled because her mom's records burned in a fire. So without being able to provide all that, you can't prove that you're related to them.
Not only that, but even if you had the records from that time, just tracking family history, Slayton is, so it's spelled with me Slayton, but I've been looking at census records back 100 years. It's been spelled every which way you can imagine. Slayton, Sloten. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, so I'm trying to think what you're going through of tracking missing records, fires, And then just what I know, it's not like census takers had to spell consistently. I mean, we've
No.
only started doing that stuff in the last 50 years. That's rough.
It's a heap. And then you can't get, for example, I cannot get my great grandpa's birth certificate until X number of years past his death have passed, something like that in Oklahoma. So it was either that or his death certificate. I don't remember, but I had to put a hold on it, and I've still got a few more years before I can even try that, because there have to have been that many years. So it's just,
That's crazy.
it's crazy. But yeah, it's the only reason we have any heritage passed down is because my mom's great aunt or great great aunt taught her some things, because she was willing to talk about it. But yeah, it's just one of those things. I don't know if it's a Southern thing. I don't know if it's an era thing. I don't know if it's an Indian thing.
I think it's an era thing. There were things you just didn't talk about.
Right. And for them, it was, you need to pass as white. You do not want to get, I did have a cousin who was murdered because my great great whatever aunt was known to be Native, and because she practiced like herbal medicine and stuff, they felt she was a witch. And the cousin, like second, whatever, he was mentally disabled. So he was murdered. So there's that, but so it was, you do not let people know you are Native, period. And so everything ends. There's a lot of people that can't trace stuff because of that. So yeah, anyway, that was a total aside, but I was just talking about.
And yet somehow still a bit more of an upper than the previous topic.
Right. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't understand how hard that is. So, and people are very judgy.
Well, and what we're going through right now with this, the story of the schools coming out and revisiting that topic of what, and when I say schools here, I say with air quotes, right? Because
residential schools.
These re-education camps, which were designed to eliminate Native culture and language, and how many children died at these places. And it's tragic and it's horrible. And and of course, Juneteenth is coming up, and all of this, again, as a historian, I'm constantly trying to get people to understand that there is secret history all around you, and you should know it because it's not that far removed, and it can happen again. What happened in Tulsa as a massacre to Black Wall Street isn't that long ago. And it was kind of one of those things that was whispered about when I was a child in Guthrie, but it wasn't taught. I was never taught.
I never heard anything about it in school.
I didn't either.
Yeah. And the same thing with what is now kind of arising in the story of the residential schools for Native children. I'm glad these things are coming to light. A lot of people don't know that Denver had a Chinatown until a massacre obliterated it. In the railroad days, Denver had a thriving little Chinatown because of the railroad that white people just couldn't tolerate at one point and destroyed and burned the businesses out. No one knows that about Denver.
No.
It's right in the middle of Lodo. There's not even a hint of it left.
And I think that happened in a bunch of places with Chinatowns. I know I just read about what was it? A German town? Yes, a German town in New York that got pretty much wiped out during one of the world wars. And just we as Americans, and of course, everybody has a history that they're not proud of, but as Americans, we have habitually wiped out or tried to completely change people that we've had a problem with. And we don't put it in the history books. History is all about, these are the great things that these white people did. Oh, but the one we learn about Martin Luther King Jr. and Eli Whitney and his cotton gin. And that's Black history for us. And
George Washington Carver.
I mean,
We don't read Martin Luther King's. We don't read many of his real speeches or materials. We get the uplifting happy quotes. We don't get the quotes and the speeches and letter from Birmingham jail that talks about some of the more what would be considered radical or revolutionary ideas, because that's dangerous. We talked a lot about language at the start of this conversation. A lot of people don't know that the whole reason that the Webster dictionary came about was they didn't want English to be infected with words from other languages. And what they were most concerned about at the time was German, because German immigration was changing American English. So they were trying to codify the grammar to avoid English being corrupted by German influence from immigration.
Which is ironic because American is a Germanic language.
Absolutely. But the
English
whole
is
thing,
a-
like not splitting an infinitive, which you can do in German, that or can't, there's a reason. Sorry, grammar class history was a long time ago, but there's this big thing of trying to suppress our history, and I think we're better if we know it. I think we're better if we do talk about it.
Well, because again, I mean, you learn history so you don't repeat it, hopefully. But then we're constantly just repeating it and declaring why it's different this time. Right. So maybe that doesn't work.
I can still remember kind of like in a history class or social studies class, kind of one day going, hey, were there no women at that time? You know, because you hear about Florence Nightingale and Betsy Ross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like,
and blank.
Yeah. Harriet Tubman.
Who is it? Was it Dolly Madison that I learned about? Because that's when the White House burned down. So I lived in Maryland, and that's when I started reading, always going to the library and getting so many good haunting stories in Maryland. Because of course the history is very rich around there. Right. And that's how I learned that there was supposed to be a ghost, because there was the tunnel out from under the White House. And when it was burning, she saved a painting of somebody, probably George Washington. I don't remember now, but the ghost is supposed to hear dragging sounds and like an oof type thing. And it's because she saved this portrait and took it out through this tunnel, just stuff like that. But there's Dolly Madison. That's her whole mention in history.
Yep.
But yeah.
I can still remember I can't remember what the book was. It might have been Founding Mothers. Don't quote me on that, because it might not have been. But it was the wives of all these founding fathers. And after reading that, I was like, please don't anyone ever mention Benjamin Franklin to me ever again. That man was a dog.
Oh,
he was terrible.
Abraham Lincoln broke my heart. He was my favorite. And then I found out about, I don't remember what tribe it was, that hanged on the White House grounds. And I was like, you bastard. You broke my heart. You were my favorite president. But, he did other good things, whatever the reasons he did them. But on that note, David, are you ready to tell us your story?
Yes, let's segue from Abraham Lincoln to David.
Yeah. So on a somewhat lighter note, perhaps, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite ghost stories that I grew up with, and that I kind of had a little bit of a part in Guthrie, growing up in Oklahoma in the 70s. So if you've seen Supernatural's first season, or I think a lot of other media has used it, there's a common urban/rural myth called a lady in white.
Mm-hmm.
There was one at White Rock Lake in Texas when I lived near Dallas briefly. And I grew up with a lady in white in Guthrie at Liberty Lake, where I grew up. And I grew up half a mile walk from Liberty Lake in a trailer in the woods. And that was my upbringing. It was a weird place. Fireflies at night. And we had prowlers that would wander and look in the trailer windows. And I was like, did I dream that as a kid? Or did I see that? Very just strange goings on out there.
That's scary.
Yeah. Bit of a side story, but I was kind of an insomniac as a kid. I ran weird hours. So my siblings would be sleeping and my parents would be sleeping. And I would get up and I'd wander the trailer at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. One night I distinctly remember looking out the window and seeing a man's face, a very pale white face glaring in. And I tried to scream and I couldn't. I froze with fear. And we all have had that dream as a child, I think, where you're or sometimes as adults, where you need to scream and you can't. But I completely panicked and could not make a sound. And I was a very quiet child anyway. I didn't really speak until I was 5 or 6. You had to kind of make me talk. Now I never shut up. So it's a funny contrast. But I saw this man and I tried to scream and I was so scared I wet myself, but I could not scream. And then I was telling my parents about it in the morning and they were mad because I wet the bed. But they did find footprints outside the next morning in the mud.
No.
Yeah. So I grew up with a lot of that kind of rural, we were in a trailer in the woods out away from things. Would not have been hard for somebody to wander up like that. But ever since I was little, and we would walk down to the lake to fish, and we had to watch out for the water moccasins, because they would try to come up to the shore. And we'd have to watch out for rattlesnakes, but at least rattlesnakes give you a warning. And we were constantly told about the lady in white. And we'd hear about her all the time. And on the weekends, you could see teenagers across the lake, and they would drive down to the lake on the other side where there were roads and places, and you'd see their pickup trucks bobbing along the roads with the headlights. And they would, drink some beer, try to see if they could find her. It was pretty common. And when we would bus to town for school, which is about a little less than an hour away. So we'd bus into school, and people would be like, "Oh, you live on Lake Liberty. Have you seen the lady in white?" And I would have nightmares about her. And she was always this very gauzy white figure, very hippie, and she would drag me under the water and drown me.
Oh.
And I would wet the bed, which again caused a lot of David's wetting the bed. What's up with David Ray? It did not help that my father tried to teach me to swim by drowning me.
Right.
A few times. He's like, "Just hold on to my arm." And that's all he said. And I did. He didn't say, "Hold your breath." He didn't give me any prep. It just dunked me to the bottom of the lake. So
That's
I saw
how
colors.
That's how rural kids learn how to swim. You kind of get tossed in and
got drowned a few times by Dad in such a manner before Mom's like, "Please stop trying to teach David Ray to swim. You're gonna literally." It's like, or at least give him better instructions first. Grab my arm, glug glug glug. So lady in white, terrified of drowning, wandering the trailer at night, and I would imagine her out the window. Now again, was it a child's dream? Was it a nightmare? Was she out there? And I had nightmares about this well into adulthood. And finally, a few years ago before he passed away, I came home to visit my grandfather. He's in his rocking chair. He's living in Oklahoma City by then. And we're just spending an afternoon together. And he says, "I remember your Aunt Karen, my Uncle Johnny's first wife, who also had a small trailer on our acreage. And your uncle would go out trucking, and she'd get lonely, and she'd smoke her marijuana, and she'd put on her wedding dress and wander the woods. She'd just scare the daylights out of those teenagers." My Aunt Karen was the lady in white.
That had been giving you nightmares.
All my life, because she and my uncle, because it was the 60s and 70s, she had gotten married in a very hippy dippy wedding dress. A lot of Stevie Nicks in her world, a lot of pot. And she'd get high and wander the woods at night in her dress.
Scare the living daylights out of half of the community.
So this whole adulthood of having nightmares about this woman drowning me, and it was my Aunt Karen the entire time.
I wonder if there was a legend. Did the legend begin with her, or was there kind of the legend and then she just built into it?
Well, that's what's really interesting is a lady in white is I don't think she did it consciously.
Right.
It's a very common myth. You see it in multiple places in multiple communities. And I always wondered, they can't all be my Aunt Karen, right? It has to come from somewhere.
I think the legend might be older than that.
Yes. I think it existed before that. The thing is, if you look at the way women dressed in certain eras, I mean, it was always white, right? It was that was predominantly the color of their clothing. So if you think about that, all a woman had to do was go for a walk, and she's the woman in white anyway, right? But yeah, and I don't think that it's even a purely American legend, because I could swear I've heard it in European stories too, but
possibly
I could be wrong.
I'll have to dig more into it. I don't think it's uniquely American either. I have a lot of books and texts on folklores and things around here, but I haven't actually dug that deep into it other than some of the American instances. And of course, it was just very funny when I was watching the first season of Supernatural, Lady in White, oh, we had one of those.
But now I really want to see a lady in white so I can yell, "Karen, is that you?"
Karen.
Hopefully it's a good Karen, not a bad Karen as they've been lately.
Oh man.
That's true.
I know. Karens right now are feeling kind of abused.
Well, and I
and-
get that.
Yeah.
And for the people who don't know the legend, a lady in white is usually a woman who drowned on her wedding night. They were on their way to the honeymoon, or they were on their way back home, and the car goes off a bridge or goes into a lake, and they drown. And then a hitchhiker finds her hitchhiking in her wedding dress, soaked, and she's asking for help, or she's asking to be taken home. They drive her to the house, and the house is always like a burned out wreck or shack, or no one's lived there for years. And when the person who stopped to pick her up looks over, she has vanished but left a puddle in the car. Like, that's generally the legend of the lady in white. But they're always found along waterways. And it's a drowning ghost story.
Yeah, and then I've heard it like died on prom night, I think, for some of the ones where they pick up the hitchhiker. And then, of course, you've got, I think it's Mexico specifically, not South America in general, but La Llorona, who drowned her children, right? And so there's lots of stories behind that. But again, it comes back to the wet and the white and the the wailing woman. So yeah, it's fascinating how this gets set up. Apparently women were super scary when they wore white. Like they were murderers, or they were murdered, or they drowned, or they had an accident, but always they need a ride.
True.
Before Uber, there's no Uber for ghosts.
Right. Like, how are you going to hitchhike?
Oh my God, there's a story. Uber for ghosts.
Hold my beer.
You can't call it goober though, because that's what I call it when my kids pick me up. When I call one of them for the ride, I'm calling goober.
What is is it Kumail Nanjiani that's in it? It's like Stuber or something. And it's,
Yes.
the guy from the big wrestler guy, Dave Bautista. We just rewatched that recently. I think it's called Stuber.
I think you're right.
Because his name's like Stewart or something. And so they call him Stuber. And he's like, don't call me that. But that movie is actually pretty damn funny. I just recently rewatched that just because it was there. So you can't call it Stuber either.
Oh, well.
You
You'll
can
come
call
up
it
with something.
Uber, Spirit Uber.
No, that
Stuber.
sounds
Utterly unrelated. We just had people over to watch Birds of Prey, which is just like a live action cartoon. Such a great movie. Bunch of cool women kicking ass. And then we paired it with Detention.
Yeah.
Which is the strangest. I don't even know what to like. I like comedic horror. I don't like a lot of heavy horror, which is funny considering what I write. But I think I guess Detention's best described as absurdist horror. It's such a silly movie. Yeah.
What happens in Detention?
Detention does.
You just have to watch it. It helps if you've had a couple of beers.
I can make that happen.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain. I mean, there's like time.
Don't tell her.
No.
The beauty of Detention is you don't want any spoilers. But I will say this: if you watch the trailer or you try to watch for it online, it poses as a standard teen slasher flick. It is not a slasher flick. There's a brutal kind of murder moment in the first 5 minutes. Then after that, it's just the most bizarre movie. You have to watch. I need to infect as many people with it as possible. And I love it because as writers, it makes no narrative sense, except it does. It's my favorite thing in all of entertainment is smart and sexy that poses as dumb and dopey, and Detention completely falls into this category.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I've got to go look it up now.
Quite surreal. It's just.
Is it available on one of the streaming services? Do you know?
It is. I just bought it on Amazon Prime because I just need to own this insane movie.
Yeah, but I could swear I watched it probably on Netflix because I think I watched it before I had anything else. So it could be on.
Yeah, but stuff moves in and out of.
Yes, so it could be on any variety of them.
Moves in and out of Netflix. I'm like, wasn't this here 10 minutes ago? And then it's gone.
Yeah, come to Denver. I'll watch it with you. It's such a weird movie. I can watch it.
Okay, let's go. Let's get in the car. I don't need to go home tonight. Last time I left. So usually I leave here, I go home, have dinner. I get home and apparently my husband and my daughter chose to believe that I had made alternate plans for dinner. And they were like, oh yeah, we saved you a piece of pizza. Oh, because they thought, for some reason, they thought I wasn't, I don't know. They thought I wasn't coming home or I had made other plans. I'm like, no, we've been doing this for months.
Yes. Right.
I don't know exactly what time I'll be home, but I will be home. And yes, I would like something to eat.
And I would like you to feed me. Damn it.
What the hell, guys?
So.
Yes, they do
So
listen
now
to
you
this.
know she wants to eat.
I do. So, all right. So
Please
now
donate to the podcast so MB can eat. A small donation can provide an MB Partlow with pizza.
A slice of pizza. You're $1 a month. We'll get one slice of pizza.
Join our Patreon.
if you up
Pay
it
for it from
$2 a month, she can have a beer with her pizza. Oh, well. Okay. So I also have a story about Oklahoma. It is also set in Tulsa.
Well,
So, apparently that's the hotbed. So I am going to talk about Hex House, although I'm not really going to talk about Hex House. That just happens to be where Carolanne Smith lived. So I got my information from Only in Your State. That has the weirdest stuff about every state. I love it. TulsaWorld.com, Ranker.com, and GatewayOklahomaHistory.org.
oh,
We have to put all these on the thing so I can, because these sound like great references.
The Gateway one is old newspapers. And at first I thought it was impossible to search. And then I backed up and read the directions. Got a lot easier after that. Because upstate New York has this awesome archived newspaper. I mean, it's all the newspapers up there and you can find all kinds of stuff. And it goes back into, I think, way into the 1800s. So I love that as a source. So there's not a whole lot known about Carolanne Smith, where she came from, or what happened to her after her short turn in the spotlight. But for a time in Tulsa, rumors about her, about Hex House and suicides and witchcraft and slavery this was all the public could pay attention to. It was like, but it was one of those things. It's like the news cycle. It was like, boom, everybody was talking it, and then boom, it was gone.
yeah.
And it was very hard to find information outside of the same nuggets of information. So in 1944, Carolanne Smith was 51 years old. She was living a quiet life in an ivy-covered duplex on 21st Street in Tulsa. Now, she did have an indulgent lifestyle. And I love the way the newspapers define this. She bought expensive perfumes. She owned a Packard automobile. She had, this one killed me. She had 46 pairs of shoes. I'm like, hello, Imelda.
I know, she's the Imelda Marcos of Tulsa in her time.
Right? I mean, who has 46 pairs of shoes anymore?
Cindy.
Okay, probably. She had 18 pairs of gloves.
That rich bitch.
The frivolity. 26 hats. And enough makeup and beauty supplies to reportedly stock a drugstore.
She's basically a holdover from the Victorian era when people were on the marriage market, right? Like, I need to be able to buy the season's accessories.
Yes, sort of. So people wondered how she was financing this extravagant lifestyle. Well, for one thing, she had two women in her thrall living in her basement who turned over all their earnings to her. And here's the thing. Okay, the whole comment about enough makeup to stock a drugstore. Every newspaper reported that these two women who lived in the basement were denied access to makeup. Because that's worse than being starved and not having decent clothing to wear.
It's in the Constitution. It should be an amendment.
So, but please note, they freely left the house each day to go to work. They left the house, they went to work, worked all day, came home, gave her their money, changed into like ragged clothes, and went down to the basement. So I don't get it either. Virginia Evans, who was 31 years old, said she was hypnotized and mesmerized by Smith, while 30-year-old Willetta Horner said she had a mother-daughter relationship with Smith. Although as a mother and a daughter, there were no basements involved or turning over of wages. Either way, they were both turning all their wages over to her. And the women later claimed that Carolanne controlled them with magic for 7 years.
Okie dokie.
Okay, so these were 30-year-old women who, and while I understand that it was a more innocent time, they were 23-ish when they entered into these relationships. So they weren't naive 16-year-olds, but Horner later sued Smith, charging she obtained money through hypnotism, trickery, threats, and coercion. And the suit was settled out of court, the money for the settlement coming from the sale of Smith's properties. The other woman, Virginia Evans, Smith conned Evans' father out of $17,000 for supposed nursing care for Virginia. I'm like, what kind of, she was able to work every day. What kind of nursing
money?
Yeah. So following in the footsteps of many, many women that we have talked about on this podcast, Carolanne reportedly had income from life insurance policies she had taken out on people like her late husband, her father, and her maid. It was really hard to find anything about this, any proof.
It's always surprising that, because that's not the first time one of them is taken out on like a maid or, some person who worked for them.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how the hell do you even do that?
Right? I mean, can I take out a life insurance policy on my lawn maintenance guy? I don't have a lawn maintenance guy.
Do it. Try
but
it.
if I did, could I? I think maybe insurance laws have changed.
He fell into that wood chipper, MB said.
Could you see what's stuck way down in there?
Hey, what's that under your lawnmower?
But her husband apparently committed suicide via a gun to the head in 1934. So it was 10 years before any of this happened. And her maid wandered into traffic. I'm like,
Did we have any report on the angle of the gunshot?
Right? Or did the maid very suddenly lurch forward with somebody behind her?
So now I know that you guys are I know Shannon is. Are you familiar with Nextdoor, the Nextdoor app? Yes.
Oh
okay.
my gosh. It's just boomers yelling at us all day about stuff, but yes.
Yeah. Or barking dogs. And it can be handy because like you find a dog, you can put on Nextdoor. Hey, put a post picture. I found this dog. Is it yours? It ate my dog or whatever. So
it has some good moments, but generally mine is just borderline racist at all times,
Right. We saw it. There was somebody selling magazines and they were black. Okay. All right. We get a lot of the bobcats are around, the bears are around with ours too.
So these were, understand her neighbors, this was all pre-Nextdoor, so they couldn't go in online and chat about this. So they reported to the police that they'd seen Carolanne burying something in the yard.
Yay.
So they dug up 2 small coffins, which contained only the bones of dogs. So another report said that there were many coffins buried over a lot. Of course. No, there were only 2. And one was her little Bonbon. That was the dog's name, was a little bulldog named Bonbon.
I feel like if you bury your dog in a coffin, you actually really liked that dog.
Right?
Yeah.
So what started the whole investigation into what the hell's going on in that house? In 1944, she was convicted of coercing the 2 young women into testifying falsely against a neighbor. So she had some disagreement with a neighbor and she convinced them to lie for her and back up whatever her story was. And she was sentenced to a year in prison for that. Well, at the same time, or shortly thereafter, she was also convicted of falsifying documents to obtain a wartime ration book in the name of her bulldog, Bonbon. In fact, when the police searched her home, they found a total of 8 ration books. And which seems to be true, when the police went to the local elementary school to see if she actually had a daughter enrolled there, it was the neighborhood children who pointed out, no, she doesn't have a daughter named Bonnie. She has a dog named Bonbon. So don't screw with the kids in your neighborhood because they will rat you out.
Apparently.
And for all of that,
If she had just shared the lipstick, it would have worked out.
Right? For all of this, she got 1 year in prison, and she seems to have fallen off the radar as soon as she got out of jail. So this spa, and it was called the Hex House because when the police went in, they found textbooks, witchcraft, books on witchcraft. Thank you. I'll get there eventually. Witch books, textcraft. So they found all these textbooks. One referred to her as a practitioner. But so it got nicknamed the Hex House because she put a hex on these women to keep them in her basement.
Okie.
And there's now
whatever you have to say to justify why you just lived in somebody's basement for 7 years. And gave them
it
your
could,
money.
and now it's your own children who do that. Right? That's the stereotype. Your children come home and live in your basement.
The thing is, that was a stereotype before it became true because nobody can afford to move out.
Yes. So it was called the Hex House. Now there is a haunted house, like a really well-known, very no children allowed haunted house in Tulsa.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be very creepy, very scary.
We're going to go stay at Dominion House and have a writer's retreat and go to the Hex House.
Right?
Oh my God.
And Tulsa's only like an hour away. So yeah, that's perfect.
So normally, because we've talked about people who poisoned and people, not that she poisoned, but people who killed people for their insurance policies. And whenever someone makes a big splash like this and you go to research them, you can find out a lot of information. You can find out all about their history, where they were born, their parents' name, their occupations, their school performance, their dog's name. I mean, we found this from people dating back into the 1800s.
We do know the dog's name.
Well, that was Bonbon. But in this case, it's just like, boom, she blossomed into the public spotlight for this one incident, and nothing was ever said again. I mean, I was going through the Oklahoma newspapers trying to find, where did she go? What happened to her after she got out of jail? There's nothing. It's like she came out of nowhere. This incident happened, and there are pictures of her house. There's like one picture of her. She just looks like your bog standard lady, 51-year-old lady, in the 1940s with a hat and a black coat. But there's pictures of all these people standing outside staring at her house. And it's just a house. It's a brick house. It's a nice house. But yeah, so because it was Hex House, it was just all this big, huge hubbub, but it was a news cycle, and then boom, it was gone. Nobody saw. She was, did I not print out the right copy? She was, or is that the other one? No, it was this one. They did hold her for psychiatric testing. And the doctor who was the head of the asylum said she was not competent to stand trial, so they postponed it. There was like a spring judicial session and a fall one. So they held her over to the fall, and then everybody all of a sudden was like, no, she's fine to stand trial. Even she said she was fine to stand. She's like, yeah, I'm not nuts. I might be greedy, but I'm not nuts. I'm fine. I'm fine to stand trial. And they did. They called her, one of the articles called her a religious practitioner.
Okay.
Because referring to the witchcraft, and I was just like, it is so bizarre.
That's pretty forward thinking for Oklahoma in the 40s. Actually, I'm a little impressed by that bit.
So yeah, that's my little.
It's funny. Yeah, we all know the news cycle. People get bored with it. I mean, now maybe even faster. We want a 30-second soundbite, and then in a week we're over it. Yep. But like with the story I did, Hart, the manhunt was 10 months before they found him. And by then the press had stopped covering it and all that. I will say they now still cover it, because one of the things was this 6-part series in Tulsa World in like 2012 or something like that, where they covered it. And unfortunately, I could only read 3 of those parts before I hit the paywall.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was really good. They had spent a year on it, and I'm sure there's so much more information I could have gotten from it. But yeah, just we get bored. We can only, it's not even that. We can only worry about things, about so many things for so long. So it's not it doesn't mean everybody's flaky. It just means there's a lot on our brains.
So I will, before we end, I am going to tell you my very favorite thing about Oklahoma.
Okay.
Because that is where I discovered something called chocolate gravy. And the woman, the waitress in the place where we stopped, could not believe, was absolutely gobsmacked that we had never heard of chocolate gravy. She couldn't believe it. She's just, y'all aren't from around here, are you? No, ma'am, we are not. I'm like, it's a tiny little hole in the wall restaurant. You would know us if we lived here.
Know them.
My favorite thing in Oklahoma is actually Guthrie. Guthrie is
Oh.
beautiful. It's red brick streets and Victorian houses. And because it was the state capital for like half a second before they literally came and stole the state seal and moved it to Oklahoma City, it's a beautiful historic little town. It was nice getting to go home and visit. I had forgotten how pretty Guthrie actually is. And it's kind of like, oh, it's cool to be from there in many ways.
It's beautiful. Well, it's good that you can have that. There's the positive, but yeah, I've mostly just driven through, admittedly. I've visited family that was specifically Choctaw land, and it was a gorgeous farm. Just so green. Living in Colorado, maybe to other people, they're like, yeah, there's green. And Colorado is green, but it's not Oklahoma green. It's not Oregon green.
It's not lush.
It's not lush. I miss ferns. It's
water.
a weird thing to miss. I miss
there's no water here.
There's no water. I miss water so much.
Creeks and brooks and ponds and rivers and lakes. And
it was like my dad. He was like, yeah, you'd go down to the swimming hole, you'd throw a rock to scare away the moccasins, and then you'd go in. You throw the rock, and I'm like, and how long did that last? But of course, you're splashing around, so snakes by nature don't want to chill with you.
Well, and I miss the water. You're right that Oklahoma has a lot of lakes, and I miss the storms. My 21st birthday was a full moon, very David, very witchy, very perfect for the author of a book called White Trash Warlock. And driving from Ardmore to Oklahoma City to spend time with some friends, and I had to stop because there were thunderstorms framing the sky like a bowl all around the horizon. And lightning flashing everywhere, which is something you don't get a lot of in Colorado. And the mountains are part of that because we can't see the storms blow in that way. But in Oklahoma, they'll frame the sky and it's very flat. And at the center of the open space at the top is the full moon hanging. It's like, what a perfect 21st birthday memory. So,
yeah, it sounds gorgeous.
Yeah.
Where was I? I was here. I don't remember my 21st birthday. Wait, was I here? Yeah, I was here. I had moved back from Oregon. So.
Well, and after that, I did get to my friends who made me a type of cocktail called a Russian Quaalude. And I must admit, I don't remember much after that.
Sounds like it met its name there. By the time I turned 21, I had done so much drinking. I think my mom took me to Cripple Creek, which is a little gambling town here for people who aren't from around here in the mountains. And it's cute. They used to do like Wild West shoot. When we first moved here, they did Wild West shootouts in the street, like every X hour or whatever, and they stopped doing that a while ago. But for me, that was just, my God, I was in love.
I think they still do it in Canyon City at Buckskin Joe's. I don't know if that's still
Buckskin
around.
Joe's isn't around. Some guy, here's the thing. I looked into that because I wanted to take the kids to it. It was basically a preserved Wild West town. For people who don't know, that was a tourist trap, and you'd go there and they do the shootouts, and they do, and they had a saloon, and you could get your sarsaparilla and all this stuff. So it was just a lot of shops. I think there was like a little train you could ride and stuff like that. And anyway, a private owner has it now. He put it on his land. And I was like, you rat bastard. I want to go.
Well, when Casa Bonita reopens, hopefully next month, we'll go there for the shootout, Shannon. So you can get your shootout at Casa Bonita. I
will so meet you there.
And
Everybody
diving.
loves to hate Casa Bonita. I take the kids there all the time.
It's my favorite place. And we'll take a Uber or something up to it. And because the margaritas and we're vegetarians. If you have the cheese enchiladas, the food's actually fine. And it's just kind of bland. But I love it. No one would ever go with me because they all grew up here. And like, I had to go for every birthday party, or I worked there in my team, or I was one of the divers. And so for me, when I finally met my partner, and it's like, let's go to Casa Bonita, we fell in love with it. And It is, I go as often as I can. And if you come visit me in Colorado, I drag you to Casa Bonita, which was great because my friend Helen from Ireland, I took her and she filmed it all on her phone. She's like, they won't believe me back home in Dublin.
It's such a crazy place. Yeah, it's a Mexican restaurant, but it's a full like amusement park inside almost. I mean, they have cliff divers
and a gorilla.
And there's a gorilla suit involved. They have these little caves that the kids can go play in. They have little plays.
Mariachi.
They have caricature artists.
It's vast. And in Christmas, it's surreal because they cover it in Christmas lights just to add a whole flavor to it. I put it in the book. I love it so much. It's one of the portals to the spirit realm in the book. And then in addition to that, I love that a family of 4 could go entertain the kids and get out for $100 or less, right? Like it's a very affordable experience for people who couldn't necessarily entertain or feed their whole family for a lot of money.
Yeah, like you. I take all my friends fly into Denver. We go up, we get them, we take them to Casa Bonita, we come down here. So
if they manage to reopen, I will go with you anytime.
You're on.
We have all these plans now with you.
I know.
We have to do this with
a writer's retreat in Oklahoma. All right. So I guess it's time for us to wrap everything up. Thank you so much for coming on here with us.
Well, this was a blast. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think we could probably talk for hours.
We could.
And cover all sorts of interesting things. We will have photos published when we have guests. That'll be on Instagram. When we have guests, we will be putting David's information on the Facebook page. And you can find us on the website at mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com. You can email us. We love to hear your stories. If you have an urban legend from your area or anything like that, I mean, write us in. That's also going to be our question of the week, though. Do you want to say the question of the week?
Yes.
Week.
It'll be
posted on Facebook.
Yes. The question of the week is, what is your favorite urban legend? Although it could be a rural legend as well.
Yeah, anything like that. You don't have to worry about whether you're defining it correctly. We don't care. We will define things any which way suits our purpose at this point. But you can email us. That question will be on there. But anytime you want to email us a story, send that to mysteriesmonstersmayhem@gmail.com. And we do have a form on our website that you can put that in as well. And other than that, please like, rate, follow so that we build, we grow,
and can get sponsors.
Yeah.
So that MB can have pizza and beer.
MB is hungry, you guys.
Fund our field trips so that we can all go to Casa Bonita and,
That's the thing. We can totally put that. Eventually I will be starting a YouTube channel and I'll put that video we did when we went up to Denver to trace that. I'll put that on there. But that means when we go on field trips, say to Dominion House and Casa Bonita, we can film stuff and put it on the YouTube channel. So that'll be, you know what? That'll be coming when I'm done with school because
that'll be next season.
But anyway, thank you so much for listening to us and bearing with us. And
thank you for being with us, David.
Thank you so much,
David. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
We'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye.